Welcome to UO Today. I'm Steve Shankman, Director of the Oregon Humanities Center. Our guest is Garrett Epps, the Orlando and Marian Hollis Professor of Law at the University of Oregon. Garrett Epps did his undergraduate work at Harvard and earned his MA at Hollins College. He earned his JD and his LLM at Duke University. He came to the University of Oregon School of Law in 1992. Prior to beginning a career in academia, Garrett Epps was a reporter for the Washington Post newspaper, and he wrote two novels, The Floating Island, A Tale of Washington, published in 1985, and The Shad Treatment, 1977, republished in 1995. More recently, he has written numerous scholarly articles focusing on the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. He is the author of the 2001 book, To an Unknown God, Religious Freedom on Trial, and most recently, Democracy Reborn, the 14th Amendment and the Fight for Equal Rights in Post-Civil War America, published in 2006. He also contributes an occasional essay online or to various newspapers. It's great, Garrett, to have you with us.
It's nice to be here.
You were an English major at Harvard.
I think technically that's correct.
Technically, that's correct. Did you have any professors that were particularly influential?
I'm trying to remember if I met any professors while I was there. I was editor of the school newspaper, and I tended not to spend a lot of time because they had classes before noon.
That was the main. That was
a real problem.
Yeah.
I will say Donald Fleming, the famous intellectual historian, I took American intellectual history from him, and this latest book is sort of a work of intellectual history. So I really did enjoy his class.
That's the only one you remember from those days.
Not the only
at Harvard.
one, but other stuff is far afield. I mean, in your field, I took a class from A.B. Lord, the author of. I got to know Professor Lord actually quite well because I was a folklore major for a year, and he wrote The Singer of Tales, and did a lot of talking to him about the Odyssey, but it's not that relevant to the book I'm flogging at this moment. So I'm going to gloss over it.
Okay. Well, now, so when did you decide to go into the law?
I was probably about 38 years old. I decided I didn't want to get old.
Really?
Yeah, I did not want to get old in the newsroom.
And that was that simple?
Yeah. Yeah, in the news business, you know, when you lose a step, your friends kill you and eat you, and so it's probably just as well to move on.
So you're happy about that decision?
Yes.
And you spent the summer in China as an observer at a magazine.
Yeah.
You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, American law is very important to the Chinese for a couple of reasons. American companies are investing in China. They're investing here. And more to the point, every couple of weeks, top Chinese banking official or an official of some provincial government pops up in the U.S. with a green card and about $1 billion he's stolen from the Chinese government. So they're very eager to get these Chinese in the diaspora home. So I was an advisor, among other things, on American immigration law, and whether these people would be deported back to China so they could get the money back.
Pretty interesting.
Yes, very interesting.
And what kind of advice did you give them?
Well, you know, I was there trying to help them get the story straight.
You
know, they don't understand American law at all.
I see. So what is the story?
Well, the story is this. The Chinese government treats these people are guilty, but the Chinese government treats suspects so badly that most Western countries won't send them back. So they have been given a real incentive to clean up their justice system. And in fact, just yesterday they announced that they were reinstituting a system of review of death sentences. China imposes 80% of the death sentences in the world every year. And Deng, in 1997, had removed the Supreme Court review because he wanted more people punished for economic crimes and killed, and this is turning out to be a bad thing. Who'd have thunk it?
So what are your observations on the state of the press freedom right now in China?
Well, the interesting thing is we're coming to the end of a period of interregnum in China. That is, Hu Jintao is sort of cementing his control, and as he does so, he is reaching out a little bit to pull the press in.
Oh, really?
Yes.
So it's not good. at the moment.
No, it never was good, and it's not better.
And it's getting worse
It
right now.
seems to be getting a little worse.
So as they get more interested in improving the law, the press is being more restricted.
You know, how many authoritarian governments do you know that sort of joyfully yield up their authority? I mean, it's a very difficult process.
Did you have any sense from how much time did you spend there this summer?
I was there for about 6 weeks.
Did you have any sense of what the future might hold? Are you at all optimistic for freedom?
It's not for me to be optimistic or pessimistic. I mean, China is tomorrow. China is the story. You and I are a footnote in it. The hinge of history is turning on what's going on in China. It's the most extraordinary economic transformation in the history of the world. And where it goes, I don't know. It's up to the Chinese. And a lot of things in that society happen under the surface.
So let's turn to home and some national issues that have raised some questions. And
first, let's mention my book.
We're going to get
available in fine bookstores everywhere.
Okay, so this is your book. This is your book on the 14th Amendment.
Yes, that is correct.
We were going to get there. We can start there now.
I'm here to
You're
do
here.
it.
Okay.
Yes.
So let's talk about your book. And why don't you, since our audience here are not necessarily legal scholars, you want to talk about what the 14th Amendment is?
Well, the 14th Amendment is the most important amendment to the Constitution. It guarantees due process, equal protection, equal citizenship for everyone. It is really the amendment that makes this country a democracy. And it wasn't a democracy until 1868 when the 14th Amendment was put in place. That began the shift. The 14th Amendment was put in place in order to do away with the flaws in the Constitution that were written into it in 1787 and that caused the Civil War. Not simply slavery, but a system that allowed states to operate as sort of independent authoritarian kingdoms, to go back to our earlier discussion. And the framers of the 14th Amendment said from now on, states are going to be internally democratic, and elections are going to be fair, and there's going to be the Bill of Rights for all Americans, and every American is a citizen. These were very radical things in 1868. My book tells the story of how this radical change was made in the Constitution, which was with great difficulty and great danger, and really, it's really the last battle of the Civil War, and it was almost lost. The South almost, even after Appomattox, even after the surrender, the South almost won. Came very close to winning that battle. And if the 14th Amendment had not been written into the Constitution, you know, the result would basically have been that all of America became a Confederacy. That sounds overdramatic, but I don't think it is.
Do you want to fill in some of the historical details? Who was president? What were some of the issues?
Remember,
what were some of the issues?
Lincoln is assassinated in April 1865.
Right.
The president now is Andrew Johnson, who nobody knew, really. Johnson had been a slave owner. He was a unionist. He was loyal to the Union, but he had throughout his career been pro-slavery. He was a virulent racist, and he was very determined. He gave a quote, an interview to a newspaper in Missouri early in his presidency. He said, "This is a country for white men, and by God, I intend to see that it remains such."
And this was a quote that was widely circulated?
Oh, yes. And a lot of newspapers in the South actually put it on the masthead of the paper. So every day it would say, "This is a country for white men, and by God, while I'm president, it will remain so." He was very popular in the South. And the feeling of Southern people was, he ordered elections to be held throughout the South for members of Congress. And he said only whites could vote. And the Southerners went and elected basically the Confederacy to come to Washington to represent them. And had they been seated in Congress, there would have been no possibility of reforming the Constitution at all.
Right.
So there's this incredible battle that goes on among very prosy sort of men in frock coats to try to save the Republic as they see it.
So when Lincoln was assassinated, did people know immediately then that the country was in for big trouble?
Well, you know, no, not really, because Johnson had talked such a radical game to get where he was. He had said, you know, we will make treason must be made odious, and traitors must be impoverished, and you know, he basically was talking about hanging the leaders of the Confederacy and so forth. But and so people thought, well, this guy's more radical than Lincoln. But very quickly, he began pardoning everyone involved in the Confederacy, with the exception of Jefferson Davis and Robert E. Lee.
Mm-hmm.
And people began to see, a different side of him. Now, there already had some hesitancy about Johnson when he became president, because he was the one national moment that he had was his inauguration as vice president in March 1864, and he took the oath of office and gave his inaugural address. He was sloppy drunk. He was basically falling over. I think it's pretty clear from the record that he was an alcoholic, and he was most of the time sober. Mm-hmm. But there's a certain kind of rigidity that sometimes sets in to someone who is remaining sober, surely simply by force of will.
We've seen that recently.
I don't know if we know any leaders who are former alcoholics who might seem stubborn, unwilling to admit a mistake, vindictive.
I can't think of any.
Actually, I actually wrote a piece. You mentioned online essays. I wrote a piece for Salon because one of President Bush's supporters had written an article saying, like Lincoln, he's trying to do this and that. And my piece is called, "Sir, You're No Abraham Lincoln." He is really so much like Andrew Johnson. Mm-hmm. It's almost uncanny. Mm-hmm. In so many respects.
Do you bring this out in your book?
Well, do I discuss Bush? No.
Yes.
No.
Okay, so it's a historical. And who's publishing it?
It's published by Henry Holt.
Uh-huh.
And it's available in fine bookstores everywhere.
I see. Okay.
Also Amazon.com.
Uh-huh. Have you checked the numbers where it is?
My mother does that for me.
See.
Every time I move up, she sends me a little signal.
Why is the 14th Amendment important today, and what's its status at the moment?
Let's think about what is the biggest domestic issue today? Immigration. The 14th Amendment governs how communities deal with immigrants, beginning with the federal government and moving forward. Okay? For example, anyone born in this country is a citizen. Why? Because of the first sentence of the 14th Amendment. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. Previous to that, the states had taken the position that they would decide who was a citizen and who wasn't. And of course, the southern states said African Americans aren't citizens. And the Supreme Court had said African Americans can never be citizens. Congress can't even pass a law making them citizens. So this was important for that reason, but it was also important because America in the 1850s and the 1860s was undergoing an immigration crisis very much like the one we are having today. The discussion then, strikingly contemporary. I mean, they said, we've got these new, the old immigrants. We had the old streams of immigrants who came from Scotland and England and even Wales, and they were great. They assimilated and they, dug right in and became part of this country. But we've got this new streams of immigrants, and they're coming from these very, very primitive, strange countries, Germany, Ireland, and they don't assimilate. They speak their own languages. They keep their own customs. They're not loyal to this country. Of course, the fact of the matter is that the North basically only won the Civil War because of two groups, one being immigrants who often would come off the ships and be sworn into the army on the dock, and the other group being, of course, runaway slaves who formed, by the end of the Civil War, one out of every 4 serving American soldiers was an African American. Mm-hmm. And those are the two groups that won the Civil War. But there was still this thing of these people are not loyal. They have foreign loyalties. They worship the Pope. They drink beer. Mm-hmm. This was a big deal, this beer thing. Mm-hmm. So this is going on, and the 14th Amendment is designed to cover them as well in 2 ways. One is to make sure that their children are citizens. There's no question about that. And beyond that, to impose equal protection and due process as obligations that states have toward everyone within their borders, not just citizens.
Mm-hmm. So equal protection and due process. You want to tell us about, did this 14th Amendment in terms of equal protection, did that enter into the Bush v. Gore decision?
Yes, this is almost the only time that the majority of the Rehnquist court found equal protection that they really liked it. Turns out that the most imperiled group to this majority was Republican presidential candidates, and they were being discriminated against.
And that was the essence of that. That was the essence of that ruling.
Yes. And actually, you know, if it could be applied to other cases, is not a bad ruling. The idea being, you know, that you really have to have one counting method. But the court has consistently refused to do that since then. They said, oh no, that case only governed that one set of facts.
So it hasn't had that ruling has not had a huge ripple effect on American democracy.
It had a bomb effect. It put Bush in office. That's enough effect.
But in terms of legal precedent,
far. Nobody's been able to make much out of it so far.
Yeah. So what about due process?
Well,
What's happening to the idea that a person accused of a crime should be guaranteed due process at the moment?
Well, the Supreme Court has been vindicating that, but that is the Federal Bill of Rights, because right now, this is unusual. It's an unusual period because the governmental unit we most have to worry about violating as a systematic rights violator today, 2006, is the federal government. That's unusual. Through most of our history and until very recently, the majority of encounters between people and law enforcement, and particularly arbitrary and difficult law enforcement, was with states, and therefore imposing the due process and the Bill of Rights on the states was really quite important. You know, not no excessive bail, no cruel and unusual punishment, no forced self-incrimination. All of these things did not apply to state governments until the 14th Amendment was entered into the Constitution.
And today you're saying that we're seeing the federal government, the executive branch.
Yeah,
I mean, the
it
executive
commonly
branch
happens in wartime, and that's what's happening.
I see.
You know,
I see.
Not just the executive branch, because we don't have what I would call a really libertarian-minded majority in Congress at this moment. We've seen some fairly draconian laws passed, but this administration has also decided they want to go beyond the law and simply act. They say the president has authority to do basically whatever he wants, and it's an ongoing struggle. Same struggle was going on under Andrew Johnson, speaking of which, who was jailing people without bail.
Oh, is that right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And under what pretense?
Well, he said
national security.
Yeah, national security.
In relation to what particular
crisis? There was an occupation going on of half the country. We're occupying Iraq now, but he was occupying Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, Alabama.
I see. So he felt that
under direct military rule, and so whenever whenever somebody displeased the military authorities, they could, in effect, be disappeared.
Yeah. When you mentioned wartime, that this is wartime, what exactly does that mean? In the United States, you're talking about the war in Iraq?
Well, constitutionally, it means that Congress has authorized the president to use military force, which has happened both in Iraq and in
Afghanistan.
Well, and in relation to the general so-called war on terror.
Yeah, yeah. But that's what I'm asking about, the war on terror. Is that officially a war?
Yes. Yeah. Sorry to tell you. As of September 12th, 2000.
As of September 12th, that was officially a war.
Yeah.
So
people are confused because Congress doesn't use the term declaration of war anymore.
Yeah.
And arguably, it's not even, there's no such thing in international law because the UN Charter and the Kellogg-Briand Pact outlaw war. So now what they say is the president's authorized to use military force, and that gives the president the full war power that Congress has under the Constitution.
And is he free to use it in that? How free is he to use this license he's been given?
Depends who you ask. You know, he says he can do whatever he wants, but you know, courts do not supervise the president's war-making power. The only checks on it are Congress and the political process. We may see how free in just a short while.
Now, do you talk about torture in your book?
Not a whole lot, because people back then, they used to beat each other up a lot, but they weren't quite as, Americans in the 19th century weren't quite as ingenious in devising ways to torture people.
So but does it impinge on the due process? Is this part of due process?
Well,
that is
yes, of course. Yes, of course.
At the moment.
Well, I think, I don't know. I mean, we don't have to get, you know, it's against the law, the very fundamental law of nations. And, you know, since 1945, every civilized country in the world has taken the position that there's some things that governments can't do. And one of them is torture.
Right. But Bush says we don't torture.
Yes, he does.
Yeah. So how do you...
He does say that. I heard him say it.
Right.
It's a lie.
And he knows it?
What Bush knows is going to be a mystery to both of us. But by the international definition of torture, what waterboarding and these other processes that they reserve the right to do are clearly torture. They're the unnecessary infliction of pain in order for, either for punishment or intimidation or to obtain information. And it's you know, our children and their children are going to ask us what we did about this. They're going to say, just the way we say maybe to our parents, what did you do during the civil rights movement? You know, they're going to say, what did you do about this when people were being tortured in the name of the United States?
Well, give our audience here some recommendations about what people can do about this at the moment.
Well, I think if we had a little more outrage being voiced, if members of Congress felt there was a price to be paid for supporting this and condoning it, they would be a little, I mean, we already see people moving away from this administration, but that's because the war in Iraq's not going very well. It's astonishing to me how little political price has been paid for basically condoning torture.
Well, you know, this is beyond the subject of your book, but why is it? You're also a reporter and astute political analyst. Why is it so hard to get traction on big issues these days and have demonstrations? Or there seems to be everything.
Well, to have demonstrations,
the air goes out of everything. It seems that. Well, I'm just wondering what it is in the climate that does
actually,
that.
I don't think that's. I think that's not exactly right, Steve. Because if you look back to last spring and early summer with the immigration protests, those were enormously successful and effective. They changed the political climate in this country quite sharply. I think that there has been a lot of repression brought to bear on a lot of demonstrations, particularly anti-war demonstrations. It is quite striking how much less free people are to demonstrate now than they were during the
60s?
Vietnam era. Yes.
Well,
they can
us
still
about
have
that.
demonstrations, but what's happened is that the government has devised this tactic of limiting where you can have the demonstrations, so that you recall this at the 2004 conventions at both of them. They set up, free speech cages. That's what they were. They were cages. And if you wanted to protest, you had to go in the cage and they would lock you in. And you could protest all you want, but you were kept at a large distance from the demonstration. And the courts have approved this tactic of sort of segregating protest so that it just is not visible.
When you say the courts have done this.
Yes.
Which courts?
Well, the United States Supreme Court is the one I study.
And so, and this is as far as you're concerned, a kind of.
It's a real step backward. We had until 2001 a fairly robust First Amendment jurisprudence in this country. I mean, a lot of the other rights were in trouble, the Fourth Amendment, maybe the Fifth, but the court was standing for the First Amendment. It's quite striking to me how few victories, real victories, we've had for the First Amendment in the federal courts since 2001. Because someone always says, well, that's fine, but what if the person is a terrorist? And then they begin to back off.
So if somebody wanted to have a rally at the Washington Monument, I mean, what about that's?
They could say, well, you can have it over here, or we don't want you near the Washington Monument because you might blow it up. We don't know if. So you'll be over in Buzzard Point here.
I see. Have people tried? As
well,
far as you know, recently
in Washington. Oh yeah.
Big ones.
That I don't know.
Yeah.
But it does get harder. It is much harder.
So, say there's a change in the Congress from Republican to Democrat. Do you see something, a shift happening as a result of that?
I've been studying 1866, my friend. I don't know. If you're within the sound of my voice, I say vote the rascals out. But that's as far as I'm going to go.
Well, what about in your period? I mean,
well,
what changed the climate? Well, of course, it was the 14th Amendment.
Well, no, but there was a midterm election, and it's very striking how similar that midterm election in 1866 is to this one. In fact, I actually wrote, I never published, a little thing called Andrew Johnson's Rules for Midterm Elections. One was, make it all about you, which of course President Bush has done, and Johnson did too. He was the first president in American history to actually go out and campaign during a midterm election. People were very shocked. It had never, and he was very bad at it.
So he screwed up candidates?
Oh yeah.
And
the
people
other
suffered,
is,
people suffered?
Put your fate in the hands of an occupied population. Because just as Bush's popularity is affected by what goes on in Iraq, the same thing was happening in the South. Johnson would say, everything's fine, the Southern people are coming back into the Union. There would be an enormous riot, first in Memphis in April, I believe, 1866, and then in New Orleans in July, in which hundreds and hundreds of black people were massacred. And basically the Civil War broke out again, and Johnson, who had said everything is going well, we're winning, stay the course, suffered, tremendous loss of prestige.
So what
and then the third rule
ahead.
is call the other side traitors.
He did that a lot.
Absolutely. He said the other side, these people are traitors to they're just as bad as Jefferson Davis, only people who support me. It's my way or the highway. And eventually that kind of rhetoric gets kind of old. People start saying, run that by me again. How did that, where did that get written down?
Right. So. But did Johnson have the kind of support Bush has of other people that believe in the my way or highway?
Well,
view?
he had the Democratic Party behind him. But it was not enough. The Republicans, which was remember the Republicans were the party that put him in the White House, right? But they had put him in the White House, and then he began saying they were traitors. And in the 1866 midterm elections, they picked up seats, and a lot of people allied with him were defeated. One of his key allies in the Senate, James Lane of Kansas, committed suicide because he said, the greatest mistake in my life was, trusting this man.
I see.
And so the result was that for the last 2 years of his term, he was a lame duck, and indeed he was the first president to be impeached.
So we have a lot to look forward to.
Well, I doubt that. But
Garrett Epps, thanks very much for being with us.
Okay. Enjoyed it.
And we've been speaking with Garrett Epps, the Orlando and Marian Hollis Professor in the School of Law. Thank you for watching.